Somewhere off the coast of occupied Crimea, Russia's Black Sea Fleet has spent the better part of 3 years pulling its biggest ships further and further from home. Not because of a rival navy. Ukraine doesn't field a blue water fleet that could meet Russian warships gun for gun. It did this with something much smaller, much cheaper, and much stranger. A fleet of remote piloted boats, some barely the size of a jet ski, packed with explosives and skimming the surface toward their targets. According to reporting from United 24 Media, the country that built that boat and the country watching it work most closely may soon be building it together. Ukraine and the United States, with a domestic American production line for the platform known as Magura V5. That's the story this video walks through. Not the politics of the war. Not who's right and who's wrong. Just one machine, how it earned this attention, and what it means that a nation with almost no navy managed to make a much larger one retreat. We'll stick to the facts as documented, flag what isn't confirmed, and by the end you'll understand why a small drone boat has become one of the most talked about weapons of this war, and why a US factory floor might be next. Start with what Magura V5 actually is, because the name gets thrown around a lot without much explanation. It's an unmanned surface vessel, developed by Ukraine's main Directorate of Intelligence, commonly known by its Ukrainian acronym HER. In plain terms, it's a long-range, remote-operated boat, low to the water, hard to spot on radar because of its small profile, and built to carry an explosive payload into contact with a much larger ship. No crew. An operator, reportedly stationed a safe distance away, steers it by satellite across open water, sometimes for hundreds of kilometers, before making the final approach to a target. The idea itself isn't new. Navies have used cheap, expendable craft against expensive ones for over a century, from torpedo boats in the age of ironclads to explosive-laden speedboats in more recent conflicts. What's new here is the combination of low cost, long range, and a program that's been used at a scale, and with a level of documented success that made naval analysts sit up and take notice. What's most surprising about this case isn't the technology itself. It's the arithmetic. A Magura V5 unit reportedly costs a small fraction of the price of the ships it's been used against. Even counting the ones that fail or get intercepted, that kind of cost gap changes the calculation for any commander deciding whether it's worth keeping a multi-million-dollar warship within range of the coastline. Now to the record, because this is where attribution matters most. Open-source analysts and Ukrainian officials have credited Magura V5-style drones with a series of strikes on Russian Black Sea Fleet vessels beginning in late 2023 and continuing through 2024. Among the incidents most widely reported, the missile corvette Ivanovets reported sunk off Crimea in early February 2024, and the large landing ship Caesar Kunikov reported sunk near Alupka less than 2 weeks later. The patrol ship Sergei Kotov was also reported damaged in an attack attributed to the same class of drone boats in March 2024. Ukrainian military intelligence has claimed responsibility for these and other strikes. Russian officials have, in some cases, disputed the scale of the damage. Where the two sides disagree, this video isn't going to pick a winner. What's well documented across independent naval trackers and satellite imagery is that Russia's Black Sea Fleet moved a significant chunk of its remaining surface combatants away from its historic home port at Sevastopol toward Novorossiysk, further from Ukrainian-controlled coastline and further from the range of small boats like these. That relocation is the fact worth sitting with. A full-scale naval power, with submarines, missile cruisers, and a coastline advantage, was reportedly pushed to reposition its fleet. Not by another navy, but by a directorate-built program of unmanned boats operating out of a country with no blue water ships to speak of. The sinking of a single corvette or a single landing ship is one story. What happened to the rest of the fleet afterward is a bigger one, and it wasn't the last obstacle this program had to clear before it became what it is today. Because it's worth saying plainly, this wasn't a smooth, uninterrupted string of successes. I went through open-source trackers and after-action write-ups from naval analysts covering this program, and one detail kept surfacing. Early Magura sorties, according to several of those accounts, reportedly struggled with the same thing that has sunk far more ambitious naval projects throughout history: weather. The Black Sea in winter is not gentle water. Rough seas in the cold months reportedly caused early guidance and control issues, and multiple early missions were reportedly aborted or failed to reach their targets before operators and engineers worked out the platform's stability and its communications link. That's not the kind of detail that makes headlines, but it's the kind that explains why a program that looks inevitable in hindsight took real trial and error to get right. Weather wasn't the only obstacle. As the strikes piled up, Russian forces adapted. Reports from defense outlets covering the Black Sea theater describe more helicopter patrols specifically tasked with hunting surface drones, plus electronic warfare aimed at the satellite links these boats depend on to be steered. Picture yourself as an operator on the Ukrainian side for a second. You're flying a boat you can't see with your own eyes, over open water, toward a warship that now has aircraft specifically hunting for small, fast-moving surface targets, and your only way to react to a threat is a video feed and a joystick. That's the environment this program has reportedly kept adapting inside of, mission after mission. And that adaptation cuts both ways, which is exactly why the reported plan to build this platform inside the United States matters. If a small, historically under-resourced maritime drone program can force a much larger Navy to change its basic posture, largely through repetition, cheap hardware, and a willingness to eat failures along the way, that's not a footnote about one war. It's a signal about where naval power might be heading more broadly. That's presumably part of why American observers are reportedly paying close enough attention to consider building the thing domestically rather than just buying it. Here's what this tells us about the moment we're in. For most of the last century, naval power got measured in tonnage, number of hulls, how many carrier groups a country could put to sea. What this program has shown, at least in the narrow but real case of the Black Sea, is that a determined, resource-limited actor can meaningfully contest control of a coastline without any of that. Not replace a navy. Contest one. That distinction matters, and it's worth sitting with rather than rushing past. According to United 24 Media's reporting, the plan under discussion involves manufacturing the Magura V5 platform, or a version of it, on American soil instead of continuing to source completed units solely from Ukraine. The outlet frames this as part of a broader pattern, the United States studying, and in some cases seeking to license or replicate, battlefield-proven Ukrainian drone technology, given how much real-world testing these systems have racked up over the last 2 years. That's testing that's difficult and expensive for any peacetime program to replicate on a range or in a lab. Specifics, like where such a factory might be located, what the production timeline would look like, or what changes an American-built version might include, aren't confirmed in the available reporting, and this video isn't going to guess at them. If those specifics exist, they belong in a primary source, not in a script written from the outside. So here's the real question this video set out to answer. How does a country without a real navy end up dictating where a bigger one is allowed to sail, and now possibly export the method to the country with the largest navy in the world? Part of the answer is doctrine, and it's worth understanding, because it explains why this is being taken seriously well beyond Ukraine and Russia. Naval analysts describe what's happened in the Black Sea as an example of asymmetric sea denial. That's a specific term worth explaining plainly. Sea denial doesn't mean controlling the water. It means making it too costly for an opponent to use the water freely without needing to control it yourself. Historically, that's been achieved with mines, coastal artillery, or submarines. What the Magura program reportedly adds is a cheap, attritable surface option, meaning something you can afford to lose in large numbers because each individual unit costs so little relative to what it can threaten. That's precisely the kind of capability a larger, better-funded Navy has an incentive to study closely and, according to this report, potentially build for itself. Here's the take that will probably get us some pushback, and we're going to say it anyway. A handful of remote-piloted boats, built by a country without a real surface navy, have arguably done more to change how a major naval power operates in a contested sea than years of longer-range missile strikes managed on their own. That's not a comment on strategy elsewhere in this war, and it's not a claim that this ends the conflict. It's a narrow, specific point about naval posture in one body of water, and we think the evidence in the open reporting supports it, which raises a real question worth putting to you directly. If a low-cost, remote-piloted boat can meaningfully contest a modern Navy's freedom of movement, does that change how you think about naval power over the next decade? Not just for this war. For the ships every major military is currently pouring billions of dollars into. We're genuinely curious where people land on that, so tell us in the comments. There's a line that shows up again and again in the coverage of this program, and it's easy to read past. Officials on the Ukrainian side have repeatedly described this as an iterative program, meaning the boats deployed today aren't the same as the boats deployed at the start. Payloads, range, guidance, and resistance to jamming have reportedly all been adjusted based on what worked and what didn't in previous missions. That's a very different model from how most militaries have traditionally built ships, where a single design gets locked in years before it ever sees combat. If the platform genuinely does move to production inside the United States, part of what's being adopted isn't just the hardware. It's that faster, combat-informed iteration cycle, something large defense contractors have historically struggled to replicate. None of that means the story ends with a factory groundbreaking somewhere in the United States. There's still a wide gap between a country studying a proven weapon and a country actually fielding it at scale. And that gap is where the next part of this story sits. What's genuinely unconfirmed, and worth being upfront about, is the scale of any eventual American production, whether it would be operated by the U.S. Navy directly or supplied to a partner force, and what legal or export arrangements would govern a Ukrainian-designed weapon built under an American label. None of that's settled in the available reporting, and any script that told you otherwise would be inventing details rather than reporting them. What can be said honestly is that the reported interest itself is a meaningful data point. Defense industries don't usually study battlefield programs this closely unless there's a real appetite to learn from them. It's also worth being honest about what this story isn't. It isn't a claim that a wave of cheap drone boats renders traditional warships obsolete overnight. Aircraft carriers, destroyers, and submarines still do things a small surface drone can't: project power across oceans, sustain a presence for months, strike far inland. What the Magura program has shown is narrower and, in some ways, more interesting, that in a contested, geographically confined body of water like the Black Sea, a resource-limited actor can impose real costs on a much larger navy using a fraction of the budget. That's a lesson about coastal and nearshore warfare specifically, not a rewrite of naval doctrine everywhere. There's one part of the reported U.S. production plan we genuinely couldn't verify well enough to state as fact in this video: the specific American entity said to be involved in manufacturing. If you've come across a primary document or an official statement naming it, we'd rather hear it from you than guess, so drop it in the comments if you've seen one. Where does this actually stand right now, as of this reporting? Ukraine continues to operate and reportedly refine the Magura V5 platform in the Black Sea. Russia's Black Sea fleet remains repositioned away from its historic Crimean home port, a shift multiple independent trackers have documented through satellite imagery over the past 2 years. United 24 Media has reported that a domestic American production arrangement is under discussion, without publicly available confirmation of contract terms, timeline, or manufacturing location. That's the honest state of the story: a documented, verifiable shift in naval posture in 1C, and a reported, not yet fully confirmed, next chapter involving a much larger power. So here's where we land. A country without a real navy didn't need one to change how a much larger navy behaves in its own coastal waters. It needed a cheap boat, a willingness to lose a lot of them along the way, and enough iteration to make the ones that got through count. Whether that lesson gets built into an American factory the way this report suggests remains to be confirmed, but the fact that the conversation is happening at all tells you how seriously this small, unglamorous machine is being taken. If you want to understand where naval warfare is actually heading next, don't look at the newest aircraft carrier. Look at the cheapest boat a bigger navy is suddenly afraid of. For sourcing on the strikes discussed here and on the reported production plans, check the primary reporting linked in the description. If this kind of story interests you, there's a related video on this channel that goes further into how drone warfare has reshaped this conflict on land, worth watching next.